Welcome to the social-engineer.org podcast security awareness series number 148. I'm Chris Hadnagy, founder and CEO of Social Engineer LLC, social-engineer.org, and the Innocent Lives Foundation. And I've been hosting this podcast since before either of you were born. No, just kidding. In 2009, I know. But I was trying to make you guys sound young. I messed that up last month. I really made the guests feel old. Anyhow, I am joined by my faithfully awesome co-host who's been patient today, Ryan the Whiskey MacDougall.
Hey, Chris. I'm Ryan MacDougall. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Social Engineer LLC. I also am the lead open source intelligence trainer for SECom, having taught at both Black Hat and DerbyCon, and as well as some private classes. I've been in the information technology field for almost 24 years, with the last 9 years being focused on adversary simulation and security awareness.
Let's just say rip to Derby. I miss you.
I felt it was appropriate given the guests today.
Yeah. It just makes me sad, though. Anyhow, this episode is sponsored by Social-Engineer LLC. You can find us at social-engineer.com. We are a premier information security service specializing in the human side of security. Fully managed voice phishing, email phishing programs, as well as security assessments. As you know, and you can probably just turn on the TV and just watch anything that's happened with this oil pipeline stuff. Security threats are not going anywhere, and we'll probably talk about that today. So we use our team of certified and trained social engineers to create targeted adversarial simulations designed to educate and train against all attacks from cyber criminals. You can find out more information on social-engineer.com, and our newly redesigned website should hopefully be much better for all of you that came to me and said it wasn't. But let's stop talking about that. Okay, a few more quick announcements because we get people ask us all the time. We have our Slack channel. If you check the show notes, I'm pointing down thinking that they're this way. Hopefully they're not this way. But if they're down here, the show notes, there is a link in the show notes to our Slack channel. There are now, I think, close to 1,000 people in there every day talking about pretext ideas, phishing, vishing, OSINT, all sorts of cool stuff like that. You know this already, and if you've been a fan of the podcast for more than 2 seconds, you know that you got to go over to pro-rock.com and check out Clutch, the best rock and roll band on the planet Earth, and check out their music. Rockie's a fan. You can tell that when you saw that right there. And let's just all say a silent prayer that we're going to be able to see a show soon. Okay. And don't forget to check out InnocentLivesFoundation.org, the amazing team at ILF. We're now up over 330 cases that we've worked, that we've helped find child predators and bring them to justice. You can get more information there on InnocentLivesFoundation.org. Also, one last announcement. Living Security just announced, you might remember our wonderful podcast with the folks from Living Security, Ashley over there, just announced the launch of their second annual Breaking Security Awareness Conference. This is a digital conference, so it's all virtual, bringing together cybersecurity industry leaders. I hate to use that because I'm about to say I'm on it. So leaders and other people like me that will come in and talk about some really cool segments, like mine's a rapid fire SE segment that we're going to be talking about, of course, social engineering. And we'll be discussing how those who work from home are especially targeted, especially now since we're kind of in this flux stage where some of us are going back to the office and some of us aren't. So you can join me on Thursday, June 24th. You can sign up for that conference. It's completely free if you want to check out some of the other things there at www.livingsecurity.com. And there'll be a direct link to the conference in the show notes in that direction after that. After. You can check it out after. Right now, you need to stare at our beautiful faces because we are here with the most patient guest on the planet Earth because we had some technical difficulties this morning. Rockie Brockway, who's currently the practice lead for the office of the CSO. Wow, that sounds like really formal. And I'm going to say TrustedSec, which just makes me think of Dave, and formal and Dave don't go together. But I'm going to learn more about that. 28 years of experience in information security and business risk. Rockie, you specialize in business risk analysis and the inherent relationships between data, assets, adversaries, and the organization's brand value. You provide strategic and tactical advisory services for TrustedSec clients, assisting them in maturing their organization's security programs. So first of all, thank you so much for being here and being patient.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the podcast.
I'm excited actually to learn a little more about, first of all, what this title even means, the practice lead for the office of the CSO for TrustedSec, because that's not something I've heard before. So what does that even mean?
Sure. So at TrustedSec, my role and my team, really is working close with organizations in kind of that virtual chief information security officer. Just from an activities perspective, helping organizations, further mature their security programs, really taking a look at how organizations can better align, the protection of important stuff, really with the business, right? So there's, so much that from an organic security program growth perspective that doesn't, inherently or naturally align with, what the business is actually trying to accomplish. Security tends to be kind of a bubble over here for many organizations. And so we try to break down those barriers and help organizations better align all of those activities around protecting, the important things, with business need and requirements.
I bet I'm going to take a guess, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but in the last year and a half or so with COVID, you've probably seen a much larger increase for the need for this kind of a service, considering how many companies have suffered drastically because of what's happening in the world.
Oh yeah. I actually, I'm bringing on a bunch of people right now to kind of help out. We at the end of last year, we really got busy, above and beyond kind of the expected, activity around the pandemic. But yeah, I'm right now booked out through September, and it's pretty crazy. But it's great work, right? I really love the kind of ability to help organizations, the whole knowledge transfer, teaching, and things of that nature. So
that's cool. So let's talk a little bit about your background. Like this, I can't imagine that 28 years ago, according to your bio, when you started this, you're like, this is what I'm going to do in InfoSec. So how did you go from starting off to this? What's your background?
Sure. So I completely lucked. I guess I can call it luck. I completely lucked into this industry. I went to university at Case Western Reserve in Cleveland, Ohio, and as a senior, one of my advisors, we were trying to figure out what I was going to do for a senior project, and he was like, "Hey, you should talk to this alumni guy. He's starting a new company." And that guy was Dr. Peter Tippett. And Dr. Peter Tippett is widely regarded as basically the author of the first antivirus program. And so his organization, which was just based out of Cleveland, I first interned and then worked for about a year. It was my first job in information security, and immediately dove into reverse engineering and disassembling virus code and figuring out what that stuff was doing. We saw the very first encrypted viruses. We saw the very first polymorphic viruses.
When was that? I'm just curious.
92, 93.
Really?
Yeah.
So 92 was the first encrypted and the first polymorphic virus?
Probably within that range, 92 to 93-ish.
That's cool. I mean, it doesn't sound that long ago, but it really is. It really,
absolutely.
I mean, that's 28 years. That is 28 years.
Exactly. Yeah, I was
ago.
about to say, I've been doing this a long time. But yeah, so I really kind of lucked into that initial kind of internship, and then got my feet wet. And he then sold the company probably in '94, I want to say, to a little organization that you may have heard of called the Peter Norton Group. And so a lot of the work that was being done a lot of the work that was being done by this team, not necessarily me, I was still just kind of learning a lot of the stuff, right? But a lot of the work eventually, if I recall correctly, became Norton Antivirus 2.0. So.
Yep. We all have 1,000 of those CDs sitting somewhere.
Right. So yeah, once that happened, I ended up moving on and then really started cutting my teeth on network and system security. And I was the first employee of one of Northeast Ohio's first internet service providers. So my formative years of like building the baseline for technical security skills was really there, above and beyond the reverse engineering stuff that I was doing, prior over at Sorters International, which was Dr. Peter Tippett's company.
So going back, again, still having a shock, like thinking about the first polymorphic virus happening back in 1992, and now you jump forward to where we are today. Yeah. I know this podcast will be coming out later on, but just this week we hear about this ridiculous ransomware shutting down a whole oil pipeline. Just what are your feelings on what we've seen over the 29 years that from that very first virus you had a chance to look at till what we're seeing now?
To me, putting it into kind of like that perspective, it's still very illustrative of the whole cat and mouse game that really is security, right? The really innovative actors are, and I remember it might have been, I think it was Josh Corman who said something, I'm going to butcher it, but he said something along the lines of like the really innovative actors are usually like a year or two ahead of the researchers. The researchers are usually a year or two ahead of developers to kind of, and then along the product cycle, they're a year and a half, beyond the market or ahead of the marketing. And then by the time it gets to legislation, it's just there's so much time, that has gone between really create. So, and it was like that back then, right? We were seeing, they can detect this virus. Why don't we encrypt it? Or now why don't we make it polymorphic or whatever? So it's just, to me, in that perspective, it's nothing's changed, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I often, when I talk to folks, we marvel that the attacks seem the same even before, forget just computers. Attacks on humans have been the same for thousands of years. It's just the medium in which they're delivered.
Yeah. No, that's very true.
The context used around the attack.
It
fluctuates, but the technique is pretty similar.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So,
Chris, real quick though, because you brought up pro rock, right? One of my hobbies in the 90s during that time frame was I was actually in a very loud math rock band and I ran my own record label, and I actually played a number of shows with Clutch.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Wow. What? What's the name? Yeah. What was the name of your band?
It was a band called Craw, CRAW.
Wow, what the heck? I'm going to have to tell Neil. That's amazing.
I guarantee he may not remember me, but we know a lot of, we know a lot of the same people.
Well, that's great. You see, this now makes this the best podcast ever because you're a fellow Clutch fan. I mean, absolutely. This is it. We are diehard Clutch fans. Every training class that we do starts with Clutch, or conference Clutch. This podcast starts with Clutch. It's all Clutch. Neil's on the board of my nonprofit. Everything in Allie's here only because of Clutch. Neil Fallon is the center of the universe.
He's great.
Yeah. That's cool. That's a cool little piece of history there, man. Where how they do the 7 layers of separation from Kevin Bacon or whatever.
Yep.
I think for Neil, it's 3 layers of separation from Neil Fallon. That's right. So, yeah.
Probably.
Everybody knows somebody.
Kevin.
Everybody loves
nothing.
Neil.
Yeah.
It was funny too, because when I was being the first employee of that internet service provider, I had the opportunity to kind of hey, I'm going to be gone for 8 weeks. I'll be back, and we'd go out on tour and. Every once in a while run into Clutch.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
So you still play?
I have an acoustic guitar over there that I pick up pretty much every day, but not really play. We did recently in 2016 a reunion. So I don't want to get too far off track, but our first 3 records were recorded by a guy named Steve Albini. Who recorded Nirvana's In Utero and the Pixies and all this other stuff. And so those were like super on tiny labels, and they really kind of missed the streaming kind of, there was a little bit before all the streaming kind of media stuff. So one fan of ours who he's now I believe the senior editor at rollingstone.com, put together a fundraiser, like a Kickstarter, raised like a ton of money to re-release, remaster those first 3 records, put them out on vinyl. It's like a 6 LP box set. And he was like, hey, do you mind if I do this? And we were all just like, we're not, so feel free. And he actually got it done. And, at one point we were just like, we should probably thank him. So we ended up kind of getting back together. We did 2 sold out shows, one in Cleveland, one in New York City. And, it's all documented. It was kind of neat.
That's cool. And to me, it's really not off base, because part of our podcast, since we're, the human hacking, all about humans, is learning about our guests. And that's just a cool piece of history, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And to me, it's also one of these things that what happens a lot of times with our podcast is younger guys and gals will email us and tell us how they feel like encouraged to get into the industry, because sometimes, I think especially now, people feel like they need to have all these giant degrees and the perfect background to get in here. And it's like, man, you hear these stories? We're all like messed up and whacked. I made surfboards and lived out of my car for like when I was at probably the same age you were making music. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
Now look what we're doing, right? So
whenever I get the opportunity, I always try to strike out the education requirements for people who want to like come work for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
We do the same here. Most of us, it's based on what have we done with our life and what is our desire to keep learning.
You can really kind of look at people and get an idea and get a feel for like how curious they are, and like, how, what's a good word? Not necessarily focus, but you can just kind of tell there's a personality type.
It's a drive. You can find it somebody.
Yeah, exactly. And when you find it, you know that those people are going to be really, really good, like information security professionals.
Yeah. Actually, that's a nice segue back into the conversation, because this is really an important topic, I feel, because we get asked this question. I got to say, this is the most popular question we get asked on our website: is what should I have, or what should I learn to get a job at a company like yours? Right. And they're always asking me in reference to like, what degrees should I have, or what letters after my name should I have? And I'm always like, okay, forget all that. Yeah. Here are 3 things I want you to have. I want you to have critical thinking. Yep. I want you, that's a big one, right? If you can't critically think, I want you to have empathy, and I want you to be a good communicator.
Exactly.
Now, you got those 3 things, man. Yep. Right. Exactly. And we got it. So what is your list? What's your list?
It's super similar, right? So I want you to, I want to look at, I'm looking for people who, really, they'll take a look at, I don't know, a remote for a TV or something like that, and be like, how can I make that do something else? Right. It's that critical kind of like, curiosity, all of that. That's so important for me, and really kind of depending then on where that person finds an interest in security, because there's so many different things to do, right? Incident response, or, reverse engineering, or whatever else, even like, risk analysis and stuff that I do today. But it's, really, once people kind of figure out their lane, now we can, really kind of figure out, what some of those other, skill sets are, right? And communication is critical from my perspective, especially since my teams really are charged with, trying to bridge that communication gap between the technical and security teams and the business, right? So they and pretty much they don't speak the same language, But,
so I'm telling anyone who's listening to this that asked that question, just rewind this last 5 minutes and listen to it again, and go to the show notes and print that out, because this is what you have now two companies that I feel really help lead this industry, and they're both saying the same thing, that I think education is a nice thing after, right? It's nice to see, like, if you have it, that's great, but I'm not looking at that first. I'm looking at those things.
Exactly.
Our last round of interviews, Ryan would always ask people, like, if you don't really know something, what do you do about that? He worded it better than that. It was like kind of lame, but it was like the whole girl was like, hey, what do you do when you don't have knowledge? Do you go and get it, or do you just be like, well, somebody else will figure that out?
Sure.
And we're looking for someone with, like what you said, that desire where I just saw a thing not working, and am I going to figure it out? Because that's hacker mentality, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what we want.
And you know, also you can, it drives me mad, like, you know, things like I don't know, I'm going to pick on a specific, like the CISSP or something like that, right? If I really need to know how many rounds are in AES 256, I can Google it.
Right. Right, which is why I think certs like the OSCP has so much more relevance, right? Because it's practical. You get that, and you like say, hey, I just hacked these 3 or 4 servers. Oh, I wrote an exploit. Oh, I fuzzed this thing. Well, now you told me you did something.
Yep.
You know,
100. Totally agree. Totally agree.
Yeah.
Or the SCPP, also very practical.
Maybe I should promote my own. Wow, so Rocky, here's the thing that you're going to learn if you haven't already. I'm terrible at promoting my own things. I'm really bad at it. I really am.
It's fine. That's
yes. Also, our practical social engineering certification. Shameless plug. It's the same philosophy. But I think the point, which I really like this, that you made this, and we got there through music and stuff, is just that it's the when you look at someone, you kind of get that gut feeling like, hey, you're going to be good or bad at this based on like how have you run your life, like how have you figured things out, how have you worked through problems, and sometimes schooling is great, so I don't cut it. I think a lot of people we have here that have degrees in education, I look at them and go, man, that's amazing that you did all that. But then I have people here, and myself included, that don't have any high degrees or anything, and those people are just as good as those with them. So we don't really focus on that as much as the personality.
Yep, 100%.
Yeah.
So how do you leverage the people that you're finding? So in your particular role, you're talking to high-level executives, right?
Yeah.
So how do you take people who are kind of that curious and that knowledgeable in that space and get them to be able to communicate that effectively to the people who aren't in that space? Those are people just decision makers. How do you bridge that gap?
So one of the I guess biggest things from my perspective is during an interview process when I'm looking for people is just these conversations, right? If we can have these conversations and it's really easy and it's really, you know, everybody kind of like, you know, has gotten the feel for everybody and we can have, you know, we have the ability to share ideas and things of that nature. That to me, you know, I can teach you how to like do our risk assessment process, right? That's specific to like, let's say TrustedSec, right? But I can't really teach you how to effectively talk to people. And so for me, it's that within that interviewing process is really critical. You know, and yeah, you know, technical backgrounds are great. Absolutely. I have a deep technical background. You know, I ran my own security company. I started it in 99. I think sold it in 08. You know, and that's after that, you know, kind of cut my teeth on the technology stuff in the internet service provider. Then I jumped and started my own security company, and, you know, Metasploit came out and, you know, all this other stuff. And so I have that background, but, you know, so that stuff's great. 100%. And if I can find people with both of those, you know, qualities, that's, you know, that's icing on the cake.
So let me ask you this question, because I'm almost guaranteed it's going to come up. How do people, let's say I'm a young person, I'm sitting here listening to this conversation, and I'm like, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life, but I don't know if I have what you just said. How can they get it? What do you suggest?
Try. What is it? The offensive security motto? Try harder.
Yeah. Try harder.
Yeah. No, seriously. But it really is that, right? You know, you don't know until you actually try to do something. And you know, if you find yourself in hopefully a scenario where you have people around you that are you know, really good, you know, mentors and knowledge transfer people, you'll get there, right? That's just, you know, but you got to try. You got to just see where you're at. And at least, you know, we talk about baselines in security all the time, right? We have to establish the baseline for, let's say, you know, program maturity or whatever else. But it's the same thing with people, right? You got to figure out what your baseline is, and now we can prioritize what direction we want to go.
Yeah. So So I'm just trying to like formulate like the thought there, like when you're thinking, because again, we get this question so much. It's just, people will always look for a path. Okay. So we now tell them, look, we want you to have these aspects in your life, and they're not, some of them aren't teachable, right? Like, how do you teach someone critical thinking?
Right.
You really can't, right? I mean, you can give someone problems and you can tell them how you would solve it, but eventually they have to do what you just said, because they got to go try. So how afraid of failure should people be when they're doing what you said, trying to build these qualities?
Never be afraid of failure. You should be failing a lot, right? That's how we learn, And I mean, look, go out, try something new, and fail, and figure out how to do it better.
Yeah, I love that message, and I was really hoping you were going to say that. I was taking a risk because. One of the things we talk about often is I feel like sometimes higher education, and not to slam all higher education because I know people that don't do this, but they oftentimes don't promote that. Like failure is almost the enemy. Mm-hmm. And I know in our industry that failure is looked at as the greatest learning teacher, the greatest teacher you can have. I know in my case, it's all of the failures throughout my career that have got me where I'm sitting right today. And if it wasn't for those failures, I wouldn't be here. Yep. But if I looked at every failure as like the reason to give up and, I suck and I don't deserve it, then that also would affect me in a way that wouldn't make me able to grow. So I love that you said that. Like, we need to look at failure. It's like it's our teacher. It's the way to have that mentality.
It's actually how you grow. I mean, you don't learn anything new if you're just succeeding at everything. So you got to figure out new ways to do things.
Yeah.
Isn't that also why like Elon Musk is always crashing his rockets?
Yeah.
Like, that's how they learn.
Yep. Yeah. And I don't have his money, so I can't do that, but
it's not a fair comparison. But.
Yeah. But I crash code once in a while, so or right. I mess up on adversarial simulations, man, bad. Yeah. Even though I teach this stuff for a living, I mess up on them sometimes real bad. And then we'll come back and we'll tell the stories. Right? We'll tell the stories to our team or in speeches because it can be embarrassing, especially when you're the guy who does this, and then you got to tell the story about how you failed miserably on a test, and you're like, but I think that's a great learning lesson, and it also tells people that it doesn't matter how good you get at this, there's still a chance that someday you're going to screw it up.
You're going to screw it up, and you're going to have some great stories.
Yeah, the concept of expert is fleeting, so you can just
right.
Even people who have been doing it for years and years still are learning. Like, that's the whole point of it.
Yeah,
right. Exactly.
So how do you blend all of this stuff we're talking, and now you have this company, right? So you're approached by a company who needs your CISO services, right? So you're going to come in and help them, learn how to start setting up a secure infrastructure, secure people. I'm just trying to, I don't try not to put words in your mouth, but I'm trying to figure out, like, how important is it that you have this top-down leadership support, or what are the most important aspects of doing your job when you approach a company that has nothing? Now they're just flat right now, and they're coming to you and saying, look, we watched the news, we saw this happen. So they haven't been breached, so it's not a fire drill, right? Mm-hmm. They're just coming to you and saying, look, we're here and we know we need to be here. Yeah. What is important for that to start?
To me, that there's like multiple kind of parallel things that have to go on at once. Obviously, me being kind of like that third party outsider, I need to figure out what I'm getting into, right? So it's getting that kind of baseline understanding of, what does their vulnerability management program look like? What does their identity management program look like? What does their risk, enterprise risk management and governance look like? But at the same time, especially if an organization is maybe, on the mid-tiered, level, from a business perspective, a lot of times those types of organizations don't have a lot of that kind of top-down support, right? So then that parallel activity for me is really then sitting down with those leaders, the leadership teams, and just kind of working through, and kind of, maybe even to pull it back around to security awareness, really kind of working through, these are the really important things. And here, I always talk about organic security program growth, right? So security programs, as they organically grow to kind of like follow along with business growth, as the business gets bigger, at a certain point, that organic growth just kind of runs into a wall, right? And they're just, hey, it's almost program by program or project by project. We need a new firewall, we need an MFA or whatever. But it's just those kind of like little singular things and activities in a bubble that isn't actually aligned with the organization's business, the organization's actual business, priorities and things like that. So that's kind of on the executive team or leadership side of the house. It's really kind of sitting down and showing, right? Because, again, most business people in leadership, not all, but most, business leadership people aren't talking our language, right? And so being able to effectively communicate and illustrate the importance of, listen, security is actually a function of your revenue gains or losses, right? And here's how here's why this really kind of needs to adapt and get out of that organic security program and align it to more of what the business is actually doing. And that's a two-way street, right? Because leadership needs to effectively communicate things like risk tolerance and risk appetite for the technical teams to actually be able to be more effective at what they do, and vice versa. Then, the technical teams need to figure out how do they communicate back into the leadership, teams in a way that, they're showing value and they're communicating what needs to be communicated so that the business can actually make better decisions.
Have you found it difficult, or maybe I should reword this. Have you found that a lot of companies today seem to be playing the ostrich game, like where, hey, look, I'm just going to lay low and hope we don't get breached, but if we do, then we'll take care of it? Or do you find there's more future thinking and forward thinking about security measures than there was 5 or 6 years ago?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that latter part of the statement, Chris. I think there is really a lot more organizations now that are being a little more proactive about it. Certainly I work with organizations that maybe haven't quite matured to that point, but from my perspective, it's fewer. Fewer organizations now are really just like not thinking about it, and more organizations are like, we should probably think about, doing, whatever, right? Whatever that thing is, but we should probably think about, trying to make sure that our business is thinking about this, because, the pipeline, right? That's just this week, right? What an impact, right? And so that's, I think that, the FUD aspect of it is always dangerous to play, kind of like walking that tightrope when you do that, but, certain things certainly help. And something like this, I think, helps.
Yeah. What's interesting is I agree with you 100%, is because we started noticing more and more companies are proactively looking for services that 4 or 5 years ago we were almost, forcing people into, right? By getting them into one thing and be like, you really should think about this year after year. And now they're thinking about it more. But I also agree that we really using FUD, using that fear it's not really a good business model, because fear comes and goes and it changes based on the latest attack. I mean, just what was it, 6 months ago? Maybe it was a little more, time is all fleeting, but Twitter got hacked through phishing. And that was the big hotness of the day, right? Everybody was worried about phishing attacks. Yep. And now, the pipeline goes down and it's ransomware. So now everyone's talking about ransomware, and phishing isn't on their tips of their tongues anymore. So if you base your business on fear, uncertainty, and doubt, then eventually what's going to happen is whatever you were selling the month before is going to go by the wayside, because the new fear is here.
Well, it's also very cyclical. So like the WannaCry stuff that happened, that's all ransomware, and it just it came and went, and it just goes back and forth. Whatever the next major attack is determines what the next thing everyone's looking for.
And it's also subjective, right? Right. Everybody's security kind of like posture is all really kind of tied into your own status quo. So everybody's idea of what is frightening and what fears them is completely different. So there's also that inconsistency about it as well.
And that's a nice point because, I mean, if you're a manufacturer, what you're protecting is different than if you're a bank.
Yep.
And so the fear is different, right? I mean, I'm sure we're all afraid of ransomware. We're all afraid of getting breached. But, if a company and some of our clients just don't have call centers and their people don't answer the phone. So phishing is not as much of a concern for them as it would be phishing or a literal ransomware breach or something to that effect, because those things will affect them harder. So
100%.
That's a nice point. Yeah.
And even to the point where to your point, manufacturing, right? I even work with organizations that have a ton of intellectual property, but it's not really at the top of mind. They're not really all that concerned if their intellectual property gets stolen, because at the end of the day, it would probably take a mammoth effort to spin up a manufacturing plant, right, that would then actually be able to replicate whatever that intellectual property was. And so, if that's like 2-3 years down the line, well, the company is already they've already, gone ahead with, newer innovations, and it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but, that happens.
Yeah, 100%.
So in your experience, what level of organizations are bringing you in for your assistance? So are you dealing with the lower end people or the higher end executives calling for your services? Where in kind of average, what level of the organization kind of introduces you into their process?
It really is across the board. And we've kind of gone back and forth just in terms of branding, right? So a vCISO, that kind of role, if an organization is larger and they already have a CISO, that's probably not going to jibe well, right? So I really look at it more from a program maturity, a program building perspective. And in that manner, I work across the board, right? Small organizations, a lot of mid-sized organizations. That's probably, the lion's share of the companies that I specifically work with is more on the mid-size. They don't really have a dedicated security team and things of that nature, but absolutely on the enterprise side as well. And that's really more along the lines of, hey, we know we have stuff to do, and we need some help. Whether that's help, facilitating those conversations, with leadership and things of that nature, or just, hey, can you help me, just push this along and let's make this happen.
So, Rockie, I know we're getting near the end here, so let me ask you a few questions. If you can list some, what would be the action steps that you think corporations should start doing now based on the things that we spoke about today?
Wow, that's a really good question. Culture is big, right? And I kind of have a love-hate relationship with the term because we primarily, most of the information security community uses it in terms of you need to build a security culture. And I think when you look at it from that perspective, you're missing kind of the other side of the story, which is security needs to also understand your culture, right? And so, and whether, if that's just we absolutely trust all of our employees, or, we're a really large collaboration kind of organization, or we really want to focus on principle of least privilege, whatever the ends of those spectrums are, your program needs to also reflect that as well, right? Security awareness training needs to be personal, right? It is never the messaging from almost all platforms, not all, but a lot of platforms historically has always been, look, you're our employee and it's your responsibility to protect our corporate data. And that doesn't change behavior. This is all about behavioral change, right? We're human, change is bad. So it's not just that, it's not easy. So if you can make that training really kind of personal and say, hey, look, I've been in this industry a long time. Here's a bunch of crazy things that I've seen. And here's 3 really simple steps to kind of help protect you and your loved ones from all the crazy stuff that we've seen on the internet. That helps change behavior.
I love that.
And then
suggestion.
that changed behavior filters up into the corporate space.
Yeah, I love that suggestion. Before you go on with your list, that to me is one of the things we tout all the time, because people say, but How does that help me at my company? Because if you got someone who's security minded when they're not at work, they're also security minded at work. And when you make things personal, people care about it more.
Exactly.
So tell me how to protect my kids from online predators. And now I love you and I want this company to be around forever. You know, so it's like that. Yes, I love that suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I do a lot of security awareness training, and that is exactly how, if I can get in front of people, I'm a decent communicator, and if I can get in front of people and be able to convey that, hey, this is really easy, right? Yeah. Authy or Google Authenticator or whatever, you're already used to like logging into a bank and getting a text, this stuff is really easy. And it's going to go so far in being able to protect, again, yourself and your loved ones from the badness out there.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Rocky, if you had to talk about colleagues that you respect most in the industry, who would you list as people that you really look up to or that helped you along the path that you took to get to where you are today?
Just in terms of helped me along the way, Dr. Peter Tippett, 100%, right? That was my intro into, into reverse engineering and whatnot, and got me, got me really hooked on the information security path. I really, I have a really deep DIY mindset, right? Do it yourself mindset. And I really respected all the people along the ways, like Marty from Snort and Renault from Nessus, just doing all this great work out there for the community, right? In the 90s or whatever. My boss Dave, right? Dave Kennedy, and just look at the TrustedSec GitHub, right? So many cool things out there. So I really respect a lot of people like that. Jack Jones, who basically came up with the factor analysis of information risk methodology, the quantitative risk assessment framework. He's fascinating, and I die by that framework. I really, really use that extensively. And then, I would say that the again, kind of like along the lines of the DIY aspect again, all that whole crew that started B-Sides, like Jack Daniel and Nickerson and Ian Amit, those guys are awesome. Yeah. And I run B-Sides Cleveland. So
oh, do you?
So I just I was kind of doing my part, picking up the DIY aspect of it.
Yeah. That's cool. It's a nice list, and it's very diverse, across multiple different genres of our field. So that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
And then one question we always ask, we ask this of every guest for the last 12 years of doing this, books. And they don't have to be about what we just talked about. It doesn't matter. It could just be a favorite book that you like or something that you enjoyed reading, or it could be about the topic we spoke about. But do you have any book recommendations?
Yeah, absolutely. I really am fascinated by a lot of kind of that natural security systems aspect of what we in information security can learn from natural nature, right? Security systems and how they're naturally built. So there's a number. I did talk a while ago, but some of the books that are really stuck with me. A book called Learning from the Octopus. A book called Emergence that was a really, really just talking about how ants work and things of that nature, and how all this kind of can be applied to, from a natural security system, how can we apply, taking it to the next step, and how can we apply that to things like that. I'm really fascinated by behavioral economics. Sebastian Junger had a great book called Tribe that came out a couple of years ago. That was really good. And when I can read fiction, the last fiction novel that I read that was really, really good was by Andy Weir. He wrote The Martian, but it was a novel about the moon called Artemis, and it was fascinating. It was really, really interesting.
Huh. Awesome list. I haven't heard of the first two, Learning from the Octopus or Emergence, and that sounds like interesting topics to look at security from a natural standpoint. So kind of
they're great.
Thank you. Thank you for those recommendations.
Absolutely.
So Rocky, if people wanted to find out more about you, just follow you, kind of learn what you're doing, where do you suggest they go?
So I'm I tread pretty lightly these days, just on social media. I'm out there, on Twitter at Rockie Brockway, and also the at B-Sides Cleveland Twitter accounts. LinkedIn, I'll post things like this. Hey, look where I was on, and whatnot. And then, the TrustedSec website, TrustedSec.com, has all of our the crazy amazing team that Dave has assembled. Just from his Avengers perspective, and so that's pretty much it. Like I said, I'm pretty light on social media these days.
Yeah, that's okay. It's perfectly safe and fine. But we'll put all the links to TrustedSec and your LinkedIn and B-Sides Cleveland in the show notes.
Perfect. You'll have to come out sometime, Chris.
Yeah, I will. I'm giving a speech at the Cleveland ISSA. It's virtual this year, but I'm doing that in just 2 weeks. But they have such a huge, their sales pitch for how awesome Cleveland is in the InfoSec industry was quite strong. Yeah. So, and TrustedSec being there obviously shows that there's some real strength in that. So that'd be great to come out sometime.
Yeah. We'll talk.
Yeah. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, especially being patient with our technical difficulties. But this was a conversation that I didn't expect to go in the direction it did. And it was fascinating and awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me. This was a blast. I really enjoyed it.
This was a lot of fun. So thanks for showing up and being with us and giving us some great tips to consider as we listen back to this.
My pleasure. Chris and Ron, thank you very much again for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
And Allie in the background.
Well, next month on the Security Awareness series of the Social Engineer podcast, we'll be joined by Michael Fortune from BT in the UK. That will be a fascinating one as well. We'll have some really interesting conversation there. So until next month, check out the show notes for all the links to the cool stuff. Social-engineer.org is brand new. Social-engineer.com, the Innocent Lives Foundation. And, of course, go over and give our buddies from Clutch a big hug by buying some stuff and coming to a show. Okay, until next month, we'll see you.